And next item is the Board of Selectmen and the School Committee for the 2012 CIP operating budget.
What we've prepared for the board, the school committee, thanks, Randy, and the department heads and the public to hear simultaneously to save time is a presentation on the operating budget, an update, and then present you with some choices. Larry has, we've been working with Larry as well, and he has another spin on those same numbers and some suggestions for the board that I think you find very beneficial. And we have some information that we put together for you on the meal stacks by way of giving factual information. There's a lot of inaccurate information out there, a lot of rumor and whatnot. And we want to make sure that the public has factual information so that they can make a realistic choice. So we've got this PowerPoint. The board has a summary of it. What I'm going to do is I'm going to go through the front end of this very fast and get really to the back end part of it in the interest of time, because I know you've got some important things to do and we've got to get into executive session later tonight. Schedule note first, and that is the warrant needs to get to the printer no later than the end of next week. I think that's April 8th or 9th. So the board really has, and we can't get the warrant printed because the single biggest thing in there is the budget. The rest of it's done. But we can't get the budget put in until the board makes some decisions, school committee makes some decisions, and the advisory committee makes some decisions. Now, the board does not have to make the decisions tonight. I know I'm going to hate myself for saying that. But here's what I would ask you. If you don't make those decisions tonight, and I know we're going to hit you with a lot, and I apologize for that, but if you don't, then I would ask you to consider a special meeting next Tuesday. Monday night, the school committee is going to meet and vote their budget, which will come out of tonight's discussion. Wednesday night, the advisory committee is going to meet and vote their budget. So next Tuesday night would be a good night if that worked in your schedules. I know that wasn't on your radar, but please consider it. So, going to go through these quick.
Chris, should we? Should we ask the superintendent and the school committee to come forward?
I need to open the school committee meeting. Okay, it's being 8 o'clock. School committee meeting is coming to order.
We have
Guys
seats
wanna
up
come
front
up?
here, too.
School committee.
And the superintendent and the business manager.
You have the nice cushy red seats. You don't have to go, Frank.
I'll be right
We
here.
like
Thank
having
you
you.
very much. I'd like to be here. Thank you. Do you want to drive?
Yeah. Thanks. Okay. Probably end up handing it back to you. How you doing? Sir, how are you? I'm good.
Go right ahead. It's a hot seat.
Yep, do you want? Is he hiding?
He's back there.
Oh, plenty of seats up front.
There's a Paul name tag, too.
He wants to sit there with us. Yeah.
Right up front, Paul.
Been an interesting few days.
I'm sure.
Start off just by saying thank you to the school committee for coming up. And I want to advise the board again, all department heads and most of the boarding committees that don't have a senior staff person are here tonight for you. So whatever questions you might have on the budget, if Randy and I can't handle them, then the department heads are here to take care of that. So we'll race through this. The board's goal, as you recall, was level services. That was trying to produce a budget that replicated all the services we had last year, again this year. That meant funding all current employees, having a 0 and a 3% COLA over the course of 2 years, depending upon which year the collective bargaining agreement expired. No new employees unless offset by new revenue, and board directive take advantage of regionalization, innovation, and conduct a department fee review. The proposed budget that resulted from that was $27.5 million for the school, $12.2 million for the general government, and $14.2 million fixed costs, total budget of $54 million. Major revenue categories, levy limit taxation is up $814,000. Now remember, the levy limit is up higher because of capital debt exclusion overrides, but that's dedicated to the debt service for which the taxpayers give us that money. The discretionary tax levy money, which we can use to balance the budget, is up $814,000. Growth taxes are up $365,000. Snow and ice deficit, we are in the hole $138,000, but Randy may have a new number. That was Friday, so.
It's a little bit worse than that, but we're hopeful that we'll see some grant funding to balance out the rest of it.
And we'll talk about that. Now, there is a snowstorm predicted for Friday. We don't know yet
Right.
if we're going to get snow or rain or sleet or what we're going to get, so hang on to your hats. This could be a cruel joke like the April Fool's storm some years ago. And cherry sheet aid is up net $11,000. It is a positive number, and that's a good thing. However, bear in mind that's a governor's proposal. We don't know what the House and the Senate's going to do with it, and the conference committee probably won't finish with it till July or August anyways, so we've got a long ways to go on that number. The net stimulus grant revenue, again, thanks to the generosity of the school committee, it's a $543,000 grant, but we had some grant money last year, so the net that we actually increased in the budget this year is only $380,000. Local receipts are down $36,000. That's monies that we realize from a wide variety of categories. Ambulance fund is up $37,000. Great news there. You know what we've produced by analyzing those fees, taking away the Blue Cross Blue Shield discount and all that. Probably about a $300,000 increase in that fund. The amount that we take out of it to support services in the general government fund, in the general fund, is up $37,000. Gross revenue is up several $100,000, and what that's going to mean as we go forward into future years is that fire, ambulance, and fire equipment will not be on the backs of the taxpayers anymore. We'll be able to pay that out of the ambulance fees. So as we go forward, that's going to be a real boon to the taxpayers. That's tremendously good news. Water, sewer, recreation, revolving accounts are up $58,000. Recreation has done some excellent work here, Recreation Commission and Recreation staff, and free cash is down $148,000 net. When you take all these revenue sources and you put them together, we've got $1.34 million in new revenue compared to last year. Now, it's important to note that as we look forward past fiscal 12, the year that we're balancing the budget for, we've got a $543,000 hole in the fiscal 13. That grant we're using this year to support the budget will not be there in FY 13, and that is an important consideration that we all keep in mind. In the area of local receipts, we've done some real good work. We're proud of that work. Generated $183,000 in new revenue for fiscal 12, but I want to turn it over to Randy at this point because we're using those revenues very carefully to rebuild free cash. Randy?
Sure. I need a microphone. Thanks, Martha. This on, Frank? We're forecasting local receipts to be almost flat with the prior year, but down about $36,000. That includes an incremental $183,000 in new fees that are forecast for next year in local receipts. So without those new fees being forecast, due to some changes, we would be taking this local receipts contribution to the budget down. A couple of notes here. The $183,000 in estimated new local receipts is a fraction of all of the new revenue that's been estimated to be created. That number is in the $400,000 to $500,000 range. So we're trying not to count our chickens here because we want to see the revenues materialize. We're only putting in some estimates that we have some good confidence that the fees will materialize. And it's important to not overutilize the local receipts, because that is where we generate, that's the primary source of free cash generation. So typically we generate, in an average year, we will generate about $1.5 million in excess local receipts, which ultimately become certified as free cash. And as you know, we're using that, we're actually using more than that in our operating budgets each year. This year, FY12, we're planning to use $1.7 million. We're using $1.848 this year. We're at high water marks. We need to de-lever from that because it's not sustainable. But this has been the town's way to balance in the lean times. The town is very well managed in this way. We do not drop every single penny that we earn into the budgets. We generate, in essence, a reserve, this free cash every year, but we then use it every year. And then when we generate excess, we do not let it burn a hole through the town's proverbial pocket. We hold it back. Traditionally, we try to put it into capital, where capital has been starved in the past in this process, or we use it as a reserve to fill in the gaps when we have the hard times. So what you have on this chart here is we're showing you with the green bars what is the net new free cash that we've generated each year over the last 11 years. And so as you can see, we started out about $1.6 million. We peaked, 2009 was the big year with the mitigation money and the excess permit fees, et cetera. There was a good year for up at the stadium. But the combined blue and purple bars are how we're using those funds. So the blue is the combined utilization for the annual operating and capital budgets. What's underneath that, the purple, are the one-offs, the extraordinary items. And the things that drive that typically are, we have a contract that's not settled on the municipal side at the end of the fiscal year. We know that's a bill that we have to pay, so we don't go spend that money. We hold it back. In essence, by not spending it, it's cash that's not spent, and it's free cash, in essence, that carries forward, that gets recertified. So when those contracts then finally get settled and we fund them, that's where they go. Or if we have a shortfall, say in the health insurance account, where that's been the second biggest driver of the use of free cash votes in the other expenses in the purple, we've used that to balance the health insurance account. So when you combine the two, you can see the top of the blue bar, which is the combination of the purple and blue, sort of has been hugging the new free cash generation until we get to the big spike in fiscal 2009. And as you can see, we didn't go below that in the very next year. We've been using that judiciously to plug in the reduction in state aid that we've been experiencing. And so what will carry forward, assuming that the use of free cash as recommended this year for the capital budget that was just supported, $750,000 there and $1.7 million for the operating budget, what will carry forward will be $1.5 million. Now we've been rolling forward a much larger number since the generation of this this number here. We've been rolling forward $4 million, $3 million, now we're down to $1.5 million. Typically, if you go back in the earlier days, we didn't roll much forward at all unless it was an unsettled contract. So that is the amount that will allow us to, or at least help to allow us to generate sort of the soft landing to fill in the gaps. But we will run out. That will ultimately come to an end. This year, as you can see, in fiscal 2010, we only generated a net $1.3 million in free cash, and that's it was a tough year for us, and we had to overutilize some of the reserves that we had. So we're back to close to a match here in 2011. In 2012, we will probably use 100 to 2,000 more than we're actually going to generate in that year. So the point here is that we need to continue to de-lever or utilize less free cash as we go forward, because that's the pattern. When we went through this almost 10 years ago, we leveraged the free cash in order to cushion the blow, to maintain as much of the service as we could. But then when the tide was turning, we had to then reduce our reliance. So then when the next downturn came, we were able to weather that one, in essence, by spending a little bit less on capital.
Thanks, Randy. This is probably the most important slide in this presentation because what this tells you, what you've been doing, and it's a tremendous compliment to this board, to the AdCom, to the school committee, and to your staff that you've had here. I take none of the credit because this all happened well before me. But you've been doing something very unique in Foxborough. You've been husbanding your resources, estimating your revenues carefully, building free cash to a great number, and then extracting it back out in order to soften the blow of the last 2 or 3 years' financial crisis. However, we need to continue that very conservative pattern if we're going to be able to weather the storms for the next few years. So basically what we're presenting to you as part of this financial plan is to continue to be very conservative with these new revenues we've created, not spend them, let them go into free cash, let free cash get certified as high as we can so we can take it back out and continue to soften the blow. We can't do this forever, but we got maybe another year or two, as long as we do some other things tonight that we'll present to you, including the beginning of reducing our staff. Critical. So, very important slide. Now, what's happening on the expenditure side? OPEB, as you all know, we've got a $62 million liability for retiree health insurance, other post-employment benefits, OPEB. We've proposed $300,000 this year. That is pitifully short of the ARC, the annual retired contribution of $1.6 million, but at least we're going in the right direction. Pensions are up $174,000 this year. Employee health insurance is up $645,000 this year. Debt service, which is included comes out of the general taxation, is up $35,000, and Southeast Regional, as you just saw, is up $19,000. Of our fixed costs, as I just said, we're starting the $300,000 OPEB, great news, but it's not nearly enough. We need to do a lot more. Our total new fixed costs are up $1.18 million. So we take health insurance, OPEB, all that stuff, it's up 1.8. Total new revenue, as you recall, 1.3. So we take total new revenue from fixed costs. We've got $163,000 net in order to balance the entire school and town budget. All the salaries, all the expenses. Clearly, that's an enormous challenge. And as I said before, back in February, this is an extremely difficult situation. Once we put all those requests into the computer, you recall back in February, we had a $2 million deficit. That was the difference between the money that we had and the monies that the departments needed in order to maintain level services. Okay? So, we looked at innovation, regionalism, and creativity, and we did a lot of good work. And I want to be sure to highlight this good work, because when we say to the taxpayers, we'd like you to consider something like a meals tax, we want to be sure to tell them that we're doing a good job with managing the money that they've already given us. So we want to be sure to put this news out there. Innovation and creativity. With Paul Jackson's help and Randy, we bid our natural gas this year. The savings, when we finally computed it, was $87,900. We beat the market adjustment by just a couple months. Great news there. We bid electricity on 2 separate occasions, and again, beat the market before it jumped astronomically. We've got a multi-year bid in place. We saved $40,000 compared to what the bids were. Reserve fund, we reduced $30,000 by tighter budgeting and the AdCom's cooperation. Reduced the legal budget $20,000. We'll see if we can maintain that through next year. I'm very hopeful. DPW has been created and saved about $20,000, not including the savings through cooperation and all that. We're putting solar panels on the roof of the DPW. That RFP just went out. It was just advertised. It'll be constructed probably in May. $7,000 is what we've said, but we think the savings will be a lot bigger. We've done recreation fees. Again, they did a great job. The solid waste budget has been reduced $30,000. We did some transferring of duties in the clerical department and eliminated a position, and we privatized the compost facility, and we're pegging that at $12,000. I think we'll actually realize a lot more money when those bids are in. Total savings, $222,000 to the general fund and another $54,000 to the solid waste enterprise fund. Now, that's $250,000 that we've reduced this budget by, with nothing but innovation, regionalism, and a lot of good department heads doing a lot of good work. The department fee analysis, which was done by Tim Cummings, our intern. I don't know if Tim's here tonight. I was hoping he was here. Is he? Great. There he is. Doing a great job. He's going to be a wonderful town manager someday. He did a great job working with our department heads. The general fund revenue that we've created so far, now this project is still in the works. There's a proposal before the board tonight, but so far it's generated $183,000 in approved new revenue. Ambulance fund revenue in excess of $300,000. The governor's budget, when it was announced in January, brought the deficit down $339. It's not that state aid went up. It's just that it went up more than we thought it was going to go down. That's all. The governor put more in his budget than what we were anticipating he would. So that was some good news. Innovation and creativity, $224. School department grant sharing, the department fee project. So you take that original deficit of $2 million, and you take all that work out, and we are down to $747. But that was February 8th. A few things have happened since. The pension assessment, we finally got that in February. It went up $37,000. We are not going to be able to do the regional program with Plainville, at least as it stands right now. Their superintendent who retired came back. They indicated they don't need the shared superintendent, but that is still a situation in flux. It could still happen. We don't know yet, but we're not counting on it. The gas and diesel crisis, this is gasoline and diesel for vehicles. That's jumped astronomically. We estimate about $35,000 net. Southeast Regional went up 19, and a scattering of other small changes went up $11,000. So that was about $110,000, $109,800. The original deficit $747. So the current deficit is $857. That's the number we're dealing with tonight. Now, again, it is not $857 if we don't want it to be. It is the difference between the revenue we've got and a level services budget. If we don't maintain a level services budget, the deficit gets smaller. Now, I will tell the board that in the presentation we're about to give you of alternatives, one conclusion that is in this everywhere is copay changes to employee health insurance and some reduction in the workforce. I will tell the board candidly that it is my belief, and I don't mean to speak for the superintendent and Randy and Paul and Debbie, but I believe it's the case that we all believe some reduction in the workforce going forward is going to be absolutely critical. We can't afford the size workforce we have, given the revenue constraints that we're dealing with in future years, no matter which scenario you choose of these alternatives, or if the board creates a new scenario. Plan A is very simple. Employee health insurance going from $5 to $15 will save us about $144,000. The employees save $42,000, their share. If we adopt the meals tax, that creates $600,000 of new revenue, and we will still have to cut the budget $113,000. The school will have to cut $79,300. The town will have to cut $34,000. $34,000 I propose by attrition for the simple reason you reduce by attrition, you don't have unemployment. This is the only position that we currently have vacant. We have two positions currently vacant, a police officer and a DPW laborer. We cut this one, and we've saved more than enough. The school budget would need to be cut by $79,300, and I will go to the superintendent to comment on what that means.
Thank you, Kevin. I think what we would do, we're hearing better news, and I know that for people who previewed the packet and the presentation, we're hearing better news, and in fact today, Katie and Bev and Debbie and I attended a meeting at the State House, and we're actually hearing better news on the special education circuit breaker. So I think we can count on somewhere up to $150,000. I'm not sure it'll be $150,000, but I would recommend to the committee that we would look at that first. as a first plan.
Plan B, again, the copay changes, $144,000, budget cuts of $713,000. Now, this is obviously Plan B, eliminates consideration of the meals tax in any way. The town share of that would be $213,000, the school share $500,000. Here's what I would propose in order to realize the town part of that cut. The vacant police officer, these cuts would be made by attrition. The police officer position, the DPW laborer, the proposed HR director position for a total cut of $181,000. Now recall that I have said to you that if we eliminate the HR director, we must put more money back into the labor council budget, because I have chopped that pretty aggressively, and I have ongoing labor issues right now, that I know are going to go into the new fiscal year. And those require the attention of either an HR professional or a labor lawyer. In addition to these cuts by attrition, we would have a modest layoff. The layoff would be a DPW. There is one layoff already in this budget. The DPW clerk, that's that $22,000 I spoke about earlier. That's already counted in here, but I'm showing it so that the public understands that this budget already has some pain in it. But secondly, I would propose the elimination of a firefighter EMT position. Now, that's a $75,000 position, but we only save $44,000 net after you factor in health insurance, but you have to put unemployment comp back in, et cetera. The total personnel cut needed, again, is $213,000, and the total cut made is $247,000. With the money that we have to put back in to the Labor Council budget, because this would eliminate the HR director, it brings us basically balanced. There'll still be a little bit of movement there, but we're basically done. In terms of the impact that this would mean to the town overall, that would be 3 full-time positions by attrition, 1 full-time position by layoff, and 1 part-time position by layoff, for 4.5 full-time equivalent positions. In terms of what this would mean for the school department, again, I go to the superintendent.
Yeah, this would be an enormous cut for us. We would initially look again at the circuit breaker in special education, and then we would generate a list of recommendations. And in that case, we'd be looking at program cuts, would be looking at raising class size. We would generate a discussion about fees. What I would propose is, if the board recommends this number, that we would have a series of meetings in April, right before town meeting, to make those recommendations and to have that discussion and debate. But this would be the beginning of the dismantling of the school system.
So, after realizing the implications of what the no meals tax versus having the meals tax 100% go into the operating budget, we had a meeting, actually we had a series of meetings, and we wanted to present you with an option, a compromise position, if you will. And this harkens to some extent to what Larry was speaking about earlier, and the idea that he had proposed to me some time ago about what if we looked at the meals tax for the purpose of not putting it into the operating budget, but rather putting it into things that we would not otherwise be able to afford. And so we met and we talked about it, and Plan C emerged, and this is the plan that we would like to offer to you jointly as our recommended plan. Plan C, again, it's an $857,300 reduction, $144,000 achieved with copay changes, additional copay changes of another $100,000, adopting the meals tax of
Just so that
$300,000.
everybody knows, that second $100,000 is for emergency room visits by changing the payment that somebody would make each time they go to the emergency room. Is that correct?
Yeah.
That's one.
That's
one. And there may be additional copay changes as well. We're still researching the menu, if you will, of copay changes that it would take to get to that round number.
Yeah, Kevin, just to that point, and Larry, I think that's a good point. Another thing that we were hearing today at the State House was the legislature's greater interest, and no promises certainly, but greater interest in allowing municipalities to bargain those through, but when you get to the end, to implement necessary changes, as long as it's similar to the Government Insurance Commission, the GIC program. So there was talk by the chair of Ways and Means, the majority leader, others. So having visited the State House frequently over the years, this is the first I've heard any forward momentum on that. So I'm more confident now than ever that we should be able to bargain them, and we obviously will bargain them in good faith. But there is a reality to this as well. So I think those two numbers are realistic numbers.
This is a new component, this additional copay change in the plan. But we're pretty, what I can tell you is that our current benefit plan design is antiquated by anyone's standards. A $5 office visit copay, even a $15 office visit copay is antiquated. Our pharmaceutical three-tiered structure is antiquated, and our emergency room copay is antiquated. We have to contemporize those changes, because if you don't contemporize the copays, it just gets buried into the premium in a more aggressive way, in a manner that's similar to what's called dollar cost averaging in the investment world. And so the faster you go, the more ground you lose, without getting into the complete detailed explanation. If anyone wants to hear it, I'll be happy to give it. But basically, the value of those copays is a dollar amount, not a percentage. So as health care costs go up, the copay stays the same. The percent that's got to get loaded onto the premium gets bigger every year, and it has a very destabilizing effect. We've got to modernize those copays. That's the bottom line. And it sounds like we're going to finally have a tool to do so, and I think we're going to have to be aggressive about that. So that part is in there. Adopt the meals tax. Now, this is a shift. As you recall, right now, we're proposing to fund $300,000 of OPEB costs in the budget. If we adopted the meals tax, in part, to fund OPEB, we can take that $300,000 out of the general government general fund, and we can use that revenue to fund the deficit. So it's a shift, okay? And in addition to that, we would still have to reduce the budget by $313,000. That's school share of $219 and town share of $94,000. Now, this is a bigger number than the original plan, but I would propose to do it by attrition, eliminating the police officer position and the DPW laborer, and I would cut overtime in police, fire, and DPW by $13,000, spread amongst those three departments. That's a very modest cut. In the first position that we lose, because we lose at least one or two positions a year through retirements, employees leaving for whatever reason, I would substitute that position by attrition, which would realize the full value of that position going forward into fiscal 13. So this would actually be a bigger cut than we would need to make, but it would position us well for fiscal 13. And in terms of, again, how the school would manage its cut, Superintendent.
Yeah, we would certainly look again at, as I mentioned earlier, at the special education circuit breaker, figuring that that's going to be better funded than it has been. We also, I mentioned this to the advisory committee a couple of weeks ago when we made a presentation here. We also, at this time of the year, hear more about people leaving for different reasons, whether it's retirements, resignations, leaves of absence, that kind of thing. So we're calculating a number now, and we think we could close that gap with both of those ideas.
The other things that we would suggest that the board consider for meals tax funding were that to be adopted. Road repair. There's been a lot of discussion about a new senior center. I don't see any way to fund that realistically, except perhaps through a partnership with the private sector, and potentially using some of this meals tax money for debt service. And OPEB, obviously, and there may be other ideas as well. There are a number of other possibilities, and these are 4 or 5 ideas that the board can consider. As you know, right now we have a number of employees, 52 to be exact, who are pre-Medicare eligible, pre-65, and post-55. At some point in the past, when someone needed to decide what the contributory share that they would be given on their health insurance would be, since they have to stay on an active employee plan because they're not Medicare eligible, somebody made the mistake, and it was a mistake, of saying 70%, which is the active employee share. In point of fact, the law that this town has adopted provides that any retiree, irrespective of their age, gets 50%. But these 52 employees are receiving 70%. Now, the audit that was completed last year for the town identified this as an issue, brought it to the board's attention. And while it is never a happy choice to take a retired population on fixed incomes and say to them, you are going to have to absorb more of your health care costs, the plain fact of the matter is that for however many years this has been going on, it's been a bonus. It should never have happened. Those employees should have immediately went to 50%, not 70. If the board, and it would be strictly a Board of Selectmen action, it does not require a town meeting vote or any other action. It is strictly the executive authority that decides it. If the board were to vote to terminate this subsidy, then it would immediately drop to 50%. Those 52 employees would have to pay 50% versus 30%, and that would save the town $140,000. The sped circuit breaker, and I would not even attempt to describe this, but I'll go to the superintendent.
This is one, just briefly, that the state 5 or 6 years ago adopted with a lot of support from the School Committee Association and Superintendents Association, which essentially funds higher cost placements, both in district and out of district placements at what should have been, what used to be or started to be, 75% of about the first 35. So the district would pay about the first $35,000, and then the state would fund 75%. That was the plan. They never realized the 75. I think they got up to 72 at one point, and then when the economic downturn hit, right now it's funded at about 40%. So as I said earlier, the legislature, the governor, fixed that. At least we're budgeting it at 60% now, if in fact we continue to hear this news. And this would be an offset. This would be an offset in our budget. This would be a consideration for the school committee, not for the Board of Selectmen. This would be a consideration for the school committee.
FEMA? Yeah, just to emphasize what the superintendent just said, this 150 would accrue to the school alone. But it could help them toward any one of those scenarios in terms of the number that they would have to cut. So obviously it'd be very good news. FEMA has indicated that we have qualified for the January snowstorm. Our county, we will be receiving 75, could be as high as 100. Now, we're already earmarking some of that to make up so that we don't exceed the amount that we earmarked for the snow and ice overrun this year. We make that up next year, as you know. That's how it works. If we get a snowstorm on Friday, then we're going to need more of this money. Whatever we get, less what we need to make up current year's over expenses, would be a net gain to the operating budget. Since I can't tell you what that number is going to be, I can't put it in this forecast and use it to offset some of that deficit. But I'm hoping when we get closer to town meeting, we can give you that number. And I'm, knock on wood, we don't get a snowstorm Friday. We might have as much as 75,000 toward that deficit, which would be great news. A couple other things we're working on. We're looking at solar panels on the landfill. I'm going very slowly and deliberately on this. Some of our neighboring communities moved quickly. They realized some nice revenue, but I don't think they maximized it. In fact, I'm quite certain that they didn't, and I don't want to say who. But I just want to say that I've looked at those deals in great detail, and I know for a fact that we can do better, but we need to move very deliberately on this. Can it be done in time to produce revenue for the new year? Possible, but I certainly don't want to commit to that. The revenue is significant, $100,000 plus, but I don't want to commit to that because I don't know yet that it'll be possible. And finally, the solid waste tipping fee, likely we will be able to renegotiate. Those costs have fallen dramatically, and we've not taken advantage of that, which would be a windfall to the folks who pay solid waste fees. Wouldn't do a lot for the general fund, but there might be a small offset. So, this now becomes a joint decision of the boards. And once again, as I did before, I want to thank all the folks that have contributed to this and have done a terrific job in putting this together. And there their names are. And they have all done great work. And I really do want to say thank you to them. Their work goes, I won't say unnoticed, but I think perhaps not appreciated enough. There is a massive amount of work that went into all these plans and all the various moving parts, and these are the folks, plus their staffs, who did it for you, and I want to be sure to say thank you. Now, the basic, excuse me, decisions that the boards need to make are these. First, the current board directive is to achieve a level services budget. We cannot, because no matter what option you choose, there is a reduction in current staffing involved. Very modest in one of the options, very large in the other options. But there is some reduction in staff involved. Why is that? Very simple, because we believe that going forward, we're going to have to begin reducing staff. There's simply no way to get around it. And the reductions in staff are going to happen in all departments. It isn't possible to balance the kind of numbers that we have to balance in one department. It's going to have to be all departments. So, attrition is the easiest way to do it because you save 100% of the job you shed because you have no unemployment obligation. And in some cases, you save more than the job because you have a health insurance component and FICA and other things. So, decision number one is, will the board agree that going forward, reduction in staff is a necessary component, and agree to change the parameter of a level services budget, or at least relieve that to something different? Number two, will you recommend the meals tax or not? And if you do recommend it, as part of the operating budget, as part of those overhead kinds of things, meaning OPEB, capital spending, road maintenance, whatever. And number three, are there anything else on that list of other optional things that you wish to consider and say you're comfortable with considering that revenue? The pre-65 health subsidy, the sped circuit breaker is going to take care of itself. It's either there or it isn't there. You don't need to decide that. The FEMA money is going to take care of itself. It's either there or it isn't there. You could consider more copay changes. So those are basically two or three other things you can take a look at. And, of course, it's entirely up to the board if you want to do something different in terms of what positions we would eliminate. So those are the decisions, I think, in some logical order for the board to consider. I have information for you that you've requested on the meals tax. It is a whole separate PowerPoint in there, and I'll be happy to go through those comments when you would like them tonight or another occasion, whatever the board's will is. But I think it is critically important at some point, and if you are going to debate the meals tax tonight and talk about it, I think it's appropriate to see it tonight, because there is a lot of misinformation out there, and we have done our level best to gather for you absolutely 100% factual information so the public can understand. And let me just say one simple thing at the get-go. This meals tax is a transfer of wealth from people outside of this community to this community. It is critically important that everyone understand adoption of the meals tax has a minuscule impact on any resident of Foxborough. It is people who don't live here who are going to give you that money. And if I don't communicate anything else tonight, I hope I communicate that, because there is a gigantic amount of misinformation out there about this meals tax, and it is critical that people understand, because of the way we're structured, this is a wealth transfer tax, and that's great news for us. And I also, as I mentioned, Larry has an analysis that he's done on this, which is very complementary to what we've done, states it a different way, but is absolutely 100% accurate, and I agree with it 100%. And I don't know when he wants to tee that up.
Well, I would say, and I don't know that I tried to make something big enough that people might be able to see, but I'll try to walk you through. Sorry about that. But I'll try to walk you through. Last year, this board had a discussion about level service or level funding. Level funding meant you don't go up to the maximum on 2.5. You level fund so that you wouldn't have that tax increase. We held a Saturday meeting that filled up more than the seats here with people talking about it. We heard about senior citizens who hadn't had an increase in Social Security in 2 years, now maybe a third year. We heard from business people who've been laid off or whose companies have laid off. So I took Kevin's material and I went through, and you look at it, and first of all, there's an acknowledgement that we have good employees here. This is not anti-union. This is not anti-employee. What I wanted to try to do is put together the financial picture as Kevin did, but put it on one page. So if you take a look at it, Kevin has that if we raise it to the 2.5 limit this year, as we have every year since Proposition 2.5 came in, it raises $814,000. In addition to that, what Kevin said is that we have new growth, and that's estimated at 365. Local receipts is slightly down. We've got it there at 0. In addition to that, we utilize free cash. Okay? So you can see here that there's new money coming in as a result of raising taxes. But they also came up with some innovative ideas to come up with additional revenue for the town without taxes. So if you take a look here, this first one here is the utility bidding. They've worked hard to get our utility rates down. They've worked hard at the DPW creation. It was going to save some money for the town. All other ideas. So when you look at this, the town manager has come up with, to start the year, approximately, the numbers aren't meant to be exact, but approximately $1.5 million of additional revenue. However, before you start the fiscal year, health insurance, the health premiums go up. They're going up by $645,000. On top of that, you have additional pension costs that are in there, which is another $174,000, and the pension, the retiree, the health care costs. We have $60 million in unfunded liabilities. We've made promises to retirees over the years that when they retire, that they'll have health care. But we've not put any money away for the cost of that health care. It's now up to $62 million. And at some point, if we don't start putting money away for that, it'll become all-consuming in the budget. And so Randy and the town manager said, we got to start funding it. So when you start looking at trying to start to fund an obligation that's $62 million that you haven't started to fund, health care, which continues to go up, what you end up with at the end of the day is almost nothing left for anything other than, you see here, I have step increases. What step increases represent is if you are in a, for instance, let me see if I get it right, Chris, with teachers. Sure. Each year, a teacher moves up a step, so they get an increase as they move up a step. And if they get a master's or they get a doctorate, they move lanes. So in addition to increases in their pay or raises, they also get step and lane changes. So even if we negotiated no further raises for anybody, and we just fund the increase in benefit costs, and we fund steps and lane changes, there's virtually nothing left. So this tries to point out what Kevin said in the sense that as a community, we, unlike, very much like the state or Wisconsin or any other community today, our ability to continue to pay our employees both salary increases, cost of living increases, step increases, and all the benefits that go with that far outstrips our ability in the revenue side. Which means, as Kevin said, we have to make some tough decisions just as they did elsewhere. And again, it gets emotional because people say maybe you're anti-employee or anti-union, but the bottom line is unless the taxpayer wants to raise their taxes, there's nothing left after you pay for the health care, et cetera. And so what Kevin and the team talked about tonight was whether or not we, as two boards, want to sit down with our unions and say, if you continue to have these low copays and these other things, there's nothing left for increases. Now, we already know that with the police, for instance, we have a 0 and a 3, and the goal is to have 0 and 3 for all of the unions. But a 0 plus a 3 divided by 2 is 1.5%. And as you can see, there's not enough in the budget to cover even the 1.5%. And that means we have to be able to talk very seriously. And as last year, as some may recall, we urged from this board for the unions, the union presidents, the town manager at the time to sit down, open up the books, go through the information and see it's not a game that we're trying to play. It's not a negotiation tactic. At the end of the day, there simply isn't enough money because the cost of benefits is far outstripping our ability to raise revenue. Now, that means we either have to cut benefits or we have to cut employees. And when you cut employees, there's the unemployment costs and things that go with it. And so, to me, there are a couple of key things that we need to get together, kind of, I think, decide as quickly as possible. Do we want to change the copays, which, as Kevin said, would raise $144,000? Yes or no? Do we want to change the ER copays and some of the other miscellaneous and raise another $100,000? And do we want to take those pre-55 folks where we're paying $140,000 a year, and do we want to put them on the same footing as other retirees who didn't retire early and as the law required? Now, this board talked a year ago, the Board of Selectmen, that we understood the hardship this creates on some retirees who retire with certain understanding. But is it fair to the taxpayer to carry that $140,000 for the next 5 or 6 or 7 years until they reach the age where they can go on Medicare or Medicaid? Or do we say, let's bring them in over a 2 or 3 year period of time so that it's not as much of a hardship for them? But even making that decision puts money back into the budget. So I think those are some key decisions that we need to make tonight. I also think we have to make that key decision on whether or not we fund the OPEB out of the operating budget, which is a huge number, $300,000, but far less than it needs to be, or whether as a community we look at something like the meals tax and use it to fund that retirement account. It's a promise we've made for years, and if we fund it out of the operating expense, it won't be $300 next year and $300 the year after, and it's going to have to increase substantially. And as that number goes up from $300 to $500 to $700, it will put a further burden on our ability to maintain the employee base that we have. So even though, as Kevin said, we will have fewer people going forward, if we don't make some tough decisions tonight, there'll be even more hardship. And I want us to be able to make these in collaboration. That's why I've, for a year, been talking about collaborating with our unions, including them in the dialogue. This is not meant to be anti-union at all. But taxpayers are under great stress today. Those that are retired haven't had increases. Those that are unemployed, those that are working part-time, those that have a variable rate mortgage, but it's at a very high rate and they can't refinance because the price of their home has dropped. So we're trying to balance all of that, and I would like to think that tonight, together, we could make those key decisions. So at the end of the day, we can help Kevin and Chris go back to both boards and say, okay, based on your decisions tonight, the deficit that I have to cut now is X versus Y, and then Kevin comes back with his plan to get that number, because he now knows what it is. If we voted on some of these things, Chris knows what his is. And I think that we're running out of time, and we need to be able to give them some direction. And what I said to Kevin was, it's a little confusing. You look at option A, and you look at option B, and you look at option C. I think there are 5 or 6 questions that if we can answer tonight, collectively, as the leaders of the community, then that allows them to redo the numbers and determine what they think the deficit will be for each one of them, because it'll still be a deficit. And then they can make the appropriate cuts. And then if, in fact, the town doesn't approve a meals tax, we'll have to come back at another point to say, how are we going to fund OPEB and how are we going to fund roads? Because ultimately we know we have to repair the roads at some point, and we know that we're going to have to fund the retirement. But what this does is at least gives us this year to do this and to have the conversation. The petition, the citizens' petition on the meals tax, really creates a dialogue, a discussion. The last 2 times was at a special town meeting. We didn't have a lot of people at either one. At a town meeting, we often have 300 or 400 people. But I think, in my view, we have to have that discussion and hear from the voters in the community as to what are the alternatives. Remember, when we first brought it up, we said we need to share with the voters what are we going to do with it. Are we just raising it for the sake of raising it? What are we going to do? I think tonight we can craft a plan that we go back to the community and say, if you want to impose that additional tax that the governor gave the authority, here's where the boards would see it going. Now, I guess we can't guarantee it forever, but we ought to say that it's our commitment that it be used for those kinds of one-time things and not operating budgets. As we talked about the grant, we have next year that $563,000 hole because we're using money that won't be replaced next year. And what I don't want us to do is add more money that won't be replaced and create even greater challenges. So even if we were to agree on all the things that Kevin recommended tonight, and even if the town agreed on a meals tax, in good conscience, we're looking at further cuts in fiscal 13, unless something changes dramatically, because healthcare costs are going to continue to skyrocket. Even if we increase the co-pays, they're going to continue to increase faster than 2.5 allows us to raise taxes. And we're going to see that the state is not going to just all of a sudden give us a 5 or 10% increase in revenue. So the next few years become very, very difficult. And I don't want to pretend to someone that if we do this year, next year will be better. I don't think next year is going to be better. Next year is going to be even tougher on us. And that's why I think it's important that we take Kevin's and Chris's suggestions and actually discuss them and vote on them tonight so that they can go back and revise the budget and come back to your board on Monday night and our board on Tuesday, and then we can argue through the cuts. I've told Kevin, for instance, I am not in favor of cutting public safety. I do not want to cut fire, and I don't want to cut police. I think it would be, from just my own personal opinion, we cannot afford to cut public safety. We have a growing set of commercial establishments in town. We have restaurants in town. We have an aging population. I'm not for cutting public safety. I think we have to look at other ways to do that. And it might even be that we have to cut town hall hours. And in my view, I'd rather someone be mad they couldn't come and pay their bill when they wanted to come than someone who needed an ambulance or needed a police officer and we were kind of short. But that's not the debate tonight. That's the debate once we come up with whatever the final number has to be. But if we don't give them the answers to the questions tonight, then how do they come back and tell us how much they need to cut?
You want to come up to the microphone? Rain?
Just a couple of comments. You know, I agree, definitely we have to continue looking at the co-pays and also bring in discussions about the deductibles, since there's probably great potential that that could help in this arena. I think the pre-65 health care subsidy, health insurance subsidy, I think we need to look at that. I think the idea of it potentially being reviewed over a 2-year period to give people some time to adjust to it, it would probably help those who are going to take the hit, because that is a pretty big hit if they have retired with that fixed income in mind. I would like to hear the meals tax presentation. I think it really is important for the public to hear that and understand how important that is, even though it's not being used potentially in its entirety to close the gap as an option A, but the idea of using it for one-time expenditures makes so much sense. And, you know, we've talked about that also. And but I think the last year's meeting, there was a clear message from the public that level services is the expectation of taxpayers in Foxborough. So, you know, that's where I recognize there has to be attrition. I know in the past, municipal and schools have always worked together to go through their lists of, you know, what were the priority positions that had to be maintained and what could actually be afforded to be reduced. So, you know, with the expectation, I guess, that that would continue to be the process, I think that would help. Because, again, where there is a public safety position on that list. And given everything that's been going on recently, we see it every day, every week in the paper. We have to have our full complement of public safety staff here. So I don't think that there's any way that we will not be taxing to the maximum 2.5. With this in place, with a meals tax in place, we'll continue to have to tax to the max. But again, fortunately, as it's in your presentation, we are the one community who has not passed an override. We are surrounded by communities having passed multiple overrides, and we have not had to do that. So, again, if we can do everything possible to maintain our services, the other options being looking at consolidation and regionalization, those are the only other ways that, at least on the municipal side, you'd be able to look at impacting and reducing numbers. So.
George, 1 second, Paul. Okay. Yep.
Thank you. George Leonard. And my comment is really to Larry's comment that was made about a municipal employee and Medicare. It is my opinion, unless I'm totally wrong, Medicare does not count for a municipal employee or a railroad employee, and that's been in existence for years. The Social Security, FICA, etc., would be wiped out completely if the school people and the municipal people suddenly started to collect on Medicare because they've never contributed to it.
So let me have Randy correct me then, or Lisa can correct me, and say where do the retirees go to when they hit 65?
Anybody who's hired at
Can you come up to the microphone though, Lisa, please?
Anybody hired after 1986 contributes to Medicare, which we pay a portion, the employee pays a portion, and the town pays a portion. So anybody hired after 86 is going to get Medicare.
It's 24 years ago, 25
So,
years ago.
right. So everybody qualifies for Part A. It's Part B that you have to qualify and get all your quarters in. So the majority of employees that are retiring do qualify for Medicare. It's the older ones that have been in the system for 25, 30, 35 years. We don't have too many of those left, but we all pay for Medicare as employees and employer.
Thank you.
Okay, Paul.
Just some general thoughts, if I can
Yes.
share with you. So, I guess I've liked the idea of expending our best efforts in engineering a soft landing, and that's what I've talked to about Randy for the last few years, a little bit with Kevin since he's come on board. I think that's important. Number of reasons. One is, I think just plain and simple, it's good for our property values. I think if we just cut to cut, I think option B. I think that would be penny wise, pound foolish in terms of property values and just a nice place to live. What's been described does sound to me like a soft landing, the option C, generally speaking. I don't think that's slashing just to slash. Again, these are just various and sundry thoughts. The one point that I have on the under 65 in the health care contribution of those retirees, I question whether or not, with fundamental fairness, if these folks thought they were going to be paying X amount and now they're going to have to pay X plus, I think that is fundamentally unfair. And if I'm employees, I look at that and I say, wow, I can get the rug pulled out from under me. I think, could it impinge on our ability to take advantage of early retirements, et cetera? So I don't know the answers to that, whether or not that would necessarily negatively affect people at high salaries leaving and retiring early, but I think that that's something that should be considered a little bit more. And again, I just really sticks in my craw the fundamental fairness. So I like what we've heard tonight. I like the idea of, or rather I should say, I think the meals tax is a very smart way to bridge the gaps that we have in front of us. I personally cannot think of a more efficient way to tax outsiders and have the least amount to paying to Foxborough residents. And being a Foxborough resident, I'm for the least paying for the Foxborough taxpayer. and it's a good way to keep property values up. So anyway, it's just, I like a lot of what I had to hear tonight. It's very thoughtful, everyone.
Kate, you want to come up to the mic?
Ma'am,
Well, it's
For the folks at home,
it's
Kate.
cable.
Madam Chair, I would like to leave here with a consensus. I think we're hearing the co-pays. And I think if we could come up with a consensus, I'd like to ask our board. I think we're kind of on board with the co-pays. I know whatever the options are, we need to talk further. But I for one, don't want to have any layoffs of teachers. I don't want to have any cuts in police and firefighters. And I think that there are some options here, and I'd like to pursue the COLAs, but I don't want us to pursue it and then find out that your board maybe picked another option. So I would like to leave in unanimous agreement here tonight
agree.
so that both boards are going down the same road,
I agree.
and that we capture this revenue that we can to keep as many teachers and police and firefighters that we can. And I'd still rather do that than, have fees and do other things. And I think with our circuit breaker and our ability to be creative and your ability to be creative, we can deal with this. So if we could get to that consensus.
Yeah, and I think, our committee has been talking about level services, and I think that I echo what Kate has said. We do not want to cut teachers and public safety workers, and I think that, we really do need to proceed cautiously. I think that, this Plan C is predicated on the meals tax passing. And obviously, that is going to be a choice of the voters in this community. But I do think that we need to proceed, as Kate's saying, with all of us understanding that level services are extremely important. We need, as a committee here, to present, as we did in our budget when we approved it at the end of January, what we thought was going to be the best services to provide for the kids and the children in our community. So I think that it would be helpful to hear more about the meals tax. You did present it not only for us but for the citizens at home. And I think our committee has talked about co-pays for quite a while and the rising cost of health insurance and the need to, be as fiscally responsible as we can about that. We have to be similar to what, companies are doing out there. So I think that is something we've had an open discussion about. This is the first time that, as a committee, we are hearing about Plan A, Plan B, and Plan C. So I think that there's a lot to digest, and I think that we definitely. I think I can speak for the committee saying that we want to proceed with a level service budget, and certainly I want to hear from the other members as to their input as well.
Dick, if you want to come to the...
No, I thank you again, but let me get to a couple of points that I think are valid. The presentation was excellent. I couldn't have anticipated it, all of the variations that are built in. I think your people did an excellent job on it. However, having said that, there are a couple of problems that, unfortunately, I see in the whole thing. These problems stem from the issue that Paul mentioned, that the people that are retired paying 70 and 30, there are 55 of them. There are 2,600 to 3,400 seniors that have had 0 raises whatsoever. It's anticipated they may get a little coming, but that'll be offset by the Medicare costs that they get. The issue is if we charge the retirees, it's unfortunate for them and their retirement plans. But these 3,400 seniors also had retirement plans and are paying the differential between the 70 and 30 now, as discussed, for the other retirees. If we're talking fairness, the question is, what is fair on that basis? In other words, I, with my Medicare, will have to pay for these retirees just to keep them at 70-30. The other issues, we can get into some of these items that are still on the agenda later, but I've discussed the 515 bit in the past. 515 is beautiful if we can achieve it. But if you look at the memo of understanding from the police department and Kevin, the 515 is for only 4 visits. Every visit beyond 4 by any party is reimbursed by the town. I don't see any line item for this reimbursement. We seem to be implying that none of the retirees or employees will go beyond 4 visits. We know this isn't true. Do we have a track record from the insurance people as to what payment or number of trips are written into this policy, so we have an understanding of this offset against this 140, which was originally presented at 200 and 190,000. The other part of that same memo of agreement, you will not find the word 0 in that agreement. The question is, why? Because their prior contract said as of July 1st, 2010, they get a 1% COLA increase. So 24 or 26 of those employees are already being paid 1%, not 0, as alleged. And the question is, as you look at that COLA and that cost, this is the basic reason I've been asking for the actual salary increases across the board through every department in the system. We have the figures from the schools. You have them. I was incorrect in saying it was 465. Paul had sent me a memo, which I lost. But between the sunset COLA and the steps, it's 370,000. Is that number correct? Something like that. It's not 465, but it's not 200,000 either. So we have these large numbers built in. When we consider 700 employees, this is the number that's been bandied around town. 700 employees is only 7.5% of our workforce. We also have 7% of our workforce, according to the state, unemployed. We also have 15% underemployed. And we have 25% of our population that are now 60 and older, which are stuck with that no raise for 2 years, plus increased Medicare costs. And we're talking fairness. Let's look at those numbers. I transmitted some data to Paul this week. The census came out. Great thing. The newspaper ballyhooed. We were up at 16-something, and they mentioned the racial issues. There are other little issues in that limited release that they had, which are very important, that you have to realize. 1 in 17 houses or housing units in town the day of the census were vacant. 1 in 17. Now, there are 207 in the R40, the outer zone, single-family homes that are vacant. If we get half of those sold, that's 200 kids. How many rooms will we have to add? How many school teachers will we have to hire? It isn't as simply as the census said. We're dropping 200 kids, 0 to 17, over this decade. It's that 200 homes that are vacant, waiting for parents and kids to come in town, which will have a major impact on us. This 1 in 17 varies. In the year 2000, it was 1 in 25. In the year 1990, it was 1 in 34. So that problem is out there. And I realize we're talking about all of these options. I think they're good. I think we need to look at them in depth. But I would caution about making a hard decision tonight, because there are other numbers that I want to go over with you after this, which is on the agenda, that may impact this. I would suggest perhaps give them guidance. This is what we're thinking, instead of voting for it. And let's talk about these other items or put the vote off till after our meeting. Thank you.
Did the
Yeah.
board want to see
It
this?
seems
There
like-
were two other questions for school committee members. Could we
Yeah,
just take those?
I'm sorry, didn't see. Come on up.
Lucy?
Good evening, everybody.
Good evening.
Let me also compliment everyone who worked on the presentations. We spent some time over the weekend reviewing them. We had some questions, a few of us on the phone. I think tonight you did a great job, Kevin, explaining the different scenarios, so I compliment everybody. And I would advocate to both boards that we go forward with recommendation C. And here's my thinking, and I'm going to offer my version of what Larry tried to do as well with kind of a simplified storyline. And my simplified storyline goes a little like this. To me, this boils down to level services versus meals tax or employee and program cuts. And I think it's that simple. Do we want level services? And if we do, are we willing to have either a meals tax or employee and program cuts? So let's ask the question about level services. I think we've all, or a number of people made comments that we do. I believe level services are still the right thing for the town. The schools are moving in the right direction. They're not as good as we want them to be. We're not doing anything that's frills and extras, but we're moving in the right direction. As the incoming superintendent said, we're going to go from great to greater, so that's good. Our emergency facilities are improved. They're not excessive. They're not dramatic, but they're improved. They're going in the right direction. Our roads need help. So we need level services. We are not, in my opinion, in a position where we're spending excessive money or going in the wrong direction in this town. Quite the contrary, we have good civic pride. I think we want to maintain that. So I think level services is what we want. So then for me, the question becomes, okay, is it meals tax or is it employee and program cuts? And maybe it's either. Maybe you start by saying, okay, it could be either. Maybe in this next fiscal year, it could be either. And the impact, if we didn't go meals tax and we did employee and program cuts, I think we'd feel some pain. Am I convinced that it would be insurmountable pain? No, but clearly there'd be some pain. So maybe you could go either way. I think what we need to keep in mind, and Kevin had one chart on this, but I want to just remind everybody about this, is that in FY13, we lose another $500,000 of stimulus grant. So when you factor that in, suddenly to me, the answer of whether it's meals tax or employee program cuts becomes pretty clear. It has to be meals tax. Because we can't survive that next $500,000 grant loss. So I think that was a very important chart. Kevin highlighted it, but I don't want to lose that in what we went through. If we lose that $500,000 and we don't have the meals tax to replace it, then we have dramatic pain, in my opinion, in the cuts we'd have to have. So in my opinion, the meals tax is unavoidable. And I'm not sure I completely agree with Kevin, although I may not understand it, as probably don't understand as well as he does. I think we do feel some pain as Foxborough residents by approving the meals tax. I don't think it's just an outside tax. I don't think we'll be excluded. Correct me if I'm wrong. But I think our pain in the town, as town people, would be outweighed by the revenue from all of the outsiders who would contribute to the meals tax. So for me, that's how I digest it and swallow it. I say, okay, there's going to be some pain, but the benefit from everyone outside the town is worthwhile. So to me, meals tax is unavoidable. We're going to have some pain. It's going to be better. I don't see how we do anything but the meals tax. I think when you think to FY13, I think the option of employee program cuts is no longer a plausible option. The one caveat I would say in my recommending that we move forward with recommendation C, and maybe it's just a personal, I don't know how many other members of the boards agree with this, I think it's very important that the craft organization and the representatives of Patriot Place be brought into this discussion. I know we've had some discussions with them, or some of you have had discussions with them in preparing this recommendation. The reason I say that is because, at least for the school system, and I think certainly for the town, they are our top partner. They offer us the ability to do so many things in this town with our schools that we couldn't do without them. So I would just want to make sure, I think if we move forward as boards in this direction, I think it's incredibly important that we bring this business partner along with us. Now, I'm naive to a lot of the other sub-issues involved in discussions that the selectmen are having on other issues with the craft organization. I just think the last thing we want to do as a community is cause any harm in that relationship, at least knowing that the meals tax has some impact to them. So those are my thoughts. And hopefully, to me, That's how you simplify a lot of the charts to say what are the choices. Thank you.
Thank you.